All right then. Whoa, look at this. Look what I got into. I was checking my motor and I thought the bearings were going to be pretty good in it and I wasn't going to bother changing them. But then I thought, well, I'll clean the motor if that's the least I could do. So I took the motor over here on the table and I started blowing it, but I never had the covers off it. It wasn't open, and I said, well, that's just a waste of time. So I thought I'd take the covers off it. Well, I took the covers off. Inside the motor was terribly dirty. I mean terribly dirty. You can see here, this is the centrifugal starting switch. And look at, that's all sawdust built up in there. So I have to clean all that up yet. And even this is the actual switch part of it here. And if you can see that, are you focused there pretty good? That contact is pretty dirty. So I'll have to try to clean that up too. And then we have the motor here. The bearings, this bearing here is not terrible. I probably wouldn't even change that if I didn't have to. But this one, oh baby. Crunch, 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 crunch. It sounds like my knees when I'm getting up off a chair. So that guy needs to be changed. So I have to go to town then and get bearings. I had to get bearings for the trunnion. So I'm going to get a bearings for the motor too and change those. So the races here are in good shape for both bearings. So that's a blessing, I guess. And I can fix up that starter switch. That's no big deal. And now, since I had the motor apart, I could get in good with the air, my air gun, and clean out around the windings. And the windings and everything look in excellent shape. And yeah, so everything looking Jim Dandy in there now. So, however, back over here at the scene of the accident, I got all my parts still laid out. And oh, I did some work on these shafts. Watch this. This one here, which raises and lowers, whoops. This one angles the blade, so that turns a lot better now. Still is a little tight spot, but tell you what, I didn't want to take that apart because that thrust bearing right there, alignment of that is critical because you don't want your blade like loose when you adjust it, so you don't want this worm gear moving. And I was concerned that I might not be able to get the alignment just the way it is right now. I wouldn't be able to get it any better, probably worse. So I'm going to live with that rough spot because I don't change the angle of the blade that often on my saw. But then this puppy up here, this is for raising and lowering. Well, I got this working pretty good. In fact, she'll damn near spin. So that thrust bearing there was pretty dirty. I lubricated that. I lubricated that brass bushing there. And also this collar down in behind that washer. Another brass bushing in there. It's hard to see it. But I lubricated that. And what I lubricated them with was graphite. So graphite dries but stays the lubricant stays there with the graphite. So when it dries, then the sawdust will stick to it. So I thought that might be a good solution for the lubrication. These trunnions, cleaned those all up. They don't look in bad shape, nor does the slot that they run in. So I think they'll be okay with a little bit of grease in those. And I think I will put grease on those, not graphite, because the graphite doesn't seem to last too long, and I don't want the trunnions wearing out. This is the shaft that the blade actually runs, that runs the blade. The blade mounts on this end, the actual saw blade. That's the left-handed thread there. When I was trying to get the bearing off of that, I kind of half damaged the threads right here. And I was able to salvage them pretty good. Not the greatest, but anyway, that shaft, other than the threads being kind of messed up, didn't turn out too bad. So I'm going to be able, that's not going to be an issue to use that. again. So all my parts look good. They're all piled up here. So I'm going to take off to town and get some bearings. And when we come back, we'll be cleaning up the base, because the base still needs a lot of cleanup. And I'll be looking at ways that I can, I don't know, make it more dust tight. One thing I did see was this part back here, that's wide open. And that's right by the blade. So the only suction comes in at the bottom of the enclosure way down there. So it doesn't make for a lot of suction inside this case to draw the sawdust down. So what I need to do is plug as many holes as I can so that it'll draw better and prevent the dust from coming out. So the next part of what we're trying to accomplish here was get these bearings off. So I ended up having to get a new puller because the puller I had wasn't long enough. Wait till I just show you. That was the puller I had right here. And you see, if I get this bearing just slide it on sort of where it was. The jaws on this puller, it's hard to hold with one hand. But anyway, I couldn't get down to hook on the bearing because the bearing would seat against this shoulder here. So another ½ inch or so. So I ended up, I bought myself a new bearing puller. Voila. It's one of those fancy ones where there's 3 jaws on it. 3 jaws, 1, 2, 3, but also the yoke of it has this center pin here so that you could just run it with 2 jaws if you wanted. Man, that's hard to see that because it looks like I don't know what. But anyways, you could have a jaw on this part of the yoke, and then on this part of the yoke you could take one of those jaws off and set it on here. So you could just have 2 jaws, or you can run it with 3 jaws. Anyway, I managed to get it on here, and I got my bearings off. And when I was in town, I got new bearings. So that bearing is stiff, to say the least. This bearing, it's rough. So I'm going to put new bearings on that stator. And then I'm going to take the stator and assemble the covers on it again. These 2 covers, this is the front cover, the back cover. On the front cover, no, sorry, I got that backwards. This is the front cover. The front cover, there's a spring here. Where did I pick it up? See how that's a wiggle spring there? Well, that's in there just so that there'll be some end float, so that when it heats up, it won't bind up too much. So I'll put the whole thing back together, and I'll put some electricity on it, see if we can make it spin again. And I have to clean that starting switch. So that's going to be my next little chore. Alright, look at that, boys. We got it back together. The bearings went on pretty slick. No big deal. Under this cover is where the... under this cover is where the starter switch was. And that went together no problem, cleaned up well. I fixed up the contacts on it a little. So anyways, there we have it. She's all back together, ready to go. And it's all been cleaned. So I'm glad I did that. I wasn't going to look at the bearings in that motor, but man, the bearings were bad. So glad I changed it. Next, move on to assembling, or finish cleaning the saw, and then assembling the trunnion and motor carriage.